Last year I played a game called Panzer Assault. It seemed a very promising game, setting World War II, a game that combines cards and a board. You use your cards as military units and then move on the board. Very intriguing idea, but the execution turned out to be very fiddly, way too fiddly for my taste, and I traded my copy away. Disappointed. But I believe in second chances, so I've decided to play Guardians of Graxia, which is published by the same publishers of Panzer Assault, Petroglyph Games, and it is based on the same idea of Panzer Assault. It is basically the fantasy version of Panzer Assault. It is set in a fantasy world where there are these guys that are fighting against these guys using swords, weapons of that type, and spells. This is pretty much all I know about the fantasy world that this game is based on, and I don't need to know more. If I wanted to know more about the fantasy world, I would read a fantasy book. So I was hoping that this game could be what Panzer Assault did not manage to be, without the minuses that I found in Panzer Assault. Is this the case? Does Guardians of Graxia manage to be what Panzer Assault should have been? Well, I'll show you the game and then I'll try to answer this question. What you see here is the setup for one of the scenarios that come with the rulebook. The rulebook has several one-player and two-player scenarios, which are built using terrain tiles, which are double-sided. So you have a lot of options, especially if you want to create your own scenarios. Players during the game will use cards representing different actions that can be performed and cards representing the characters that will perform those actions. These are very thick decks. That means that you really have a lot of options that you can use, a lot of different factors that you can mix and match, which is great. Let's have a look at the spells. And by the way, let's look at the art. I mean, the art is really neat. It's really pleasant. I enjoy this art quite a bit. The spell cards have a cost in mana that you have to pay to cast that spell, indication of when you use that spell, effect on this of the spell, and then also the cards have a battle modifier value that you use if you're using this card during battle, in which case if you're using this number printed here, different cards have different numbers, if you use that number then you ignore everything else on the card, both the text and the cost. You can spend the card for free during the battle phase. The characters also here, very nice art, a lot of variety, very enjoyable art. The characters also have a cost in mana. That's how much it costs to summon the character. Level of health, well, you guessed it, the character goes on to 0 character dice. Attack, which may be magic attack or physical attack. Defense against physical attack, defense against magic attack, and then the characters may have special abilities that may be used during the command phase if they are marked by a light blue symbol, or during the battle phase if they are marked by a red symbol. The game also comes with miniatures to represent the most important characters in the game, but unfortunately some of those miniatures came out of the box completely warped, with the figurine coming out at weird angles from the base, and so now my game looks more like Limbo Dancers of Graxia than Guardians of Graxia. These scenario instructions will tell you all you need to know about initial hand, initial amount of mana that you receive, and victory conditions. Then the game starts. The game is divided in turns. At the beginning of each turn, the active player draws 4 cards for free. He can choose to draw units and or spells. Then the player can spend mana to purchase more cards, up to the maximum of 12 units and or spells. The players will also always have the bluff card in their hand, and that means that the actual maximum hand is 13, 12 other cards plus this one, which is used in combat. After acquiring new cards, the active player goes to the command phase, during which he can perform several actions in any order he wants. He can summon new units by paying the amount of mana printed on the card of the unit itself. He can play command cards by spending the necessary amount of mana and simply resolving the effect printed on the card. And the player, of course, can activate his units on the board. During the command phase, units can be activated for their command abilities, the ones with the light blue symbol. If a unit uses a command ability, usually it does not do anything else. Ranged abilities are usually command abilities, so if you're launching a range attack, you don't do anything else. Range attacks have two numbers. The first one is range, and the second one is the damage that is inflicted on the opponent. Suppose that she uses his ability against him, and she inflicts a -2 health points to that guy. And then we mark her with the ability marker to indicate that she acted and she used her ability. Units that do not use command abilities can move, and movement is by one tile usually. Units can attack, and they attack adjacent units, and or units can shield. When a unit receives a shield, that unit will be protected partially, and a shield will absorb 2 points of damage for that unit. Now, attack, shield, and move are actions that can be combined. A unit could move and then attack, or attack and then move, or move and shield. The only two actions that cannot be combined actually are attack and shield. After the player has activated his units and or summoned new units and or played command cards, the player collects the mana that will be given to him by the tiles that he controls. Control of a tile is based on having a card on a tile and or being the last player that had a card in a certain tile. So the player has to gather all the mana coming from his tiles. Then the player again has an opportunity to purchase cards. After that, his turn is over. He checks to see if he met victory conditions. If not, the game goes to the other player, who goes to the same sequence. Combat is resolved through a procedure that, let's just say, is not the most elegant that I've ever seen. The player aid explains the battle sequence in detail, and these are all the steps that you need to resolve to complete a single battle. Each battle you have to go through all of these steps. Yes, that is a lot of steps. Once you get to know the game, some of those steps are really intuitive, are resolved immediately. Still, there is quite a procedure to complete. To show you how this works, I've placed 2 tiles and 2 characters here on the general tracker board by the battle track. Let's imagine that this card is attacking that character. I'm also using these color markers just to indicate which character is using which marker on the battle track. First thing that you do, you determine the initial battle value for each character. That is the attack of a character minus the appropriate defense of the opponent. This guy attacks with 10 points of physical attack. The response is 5 points of defense against physical. Then his initial attack value is of 5. This character attacks with 7. Using magic, the defense of this character against magic is 4. His initial attack is of 4. Well, I mean 3. Next, the defender can take advantage of the terrain modifier in the tile in which he is. Only the defender can take advantage of terrain. This tile grants 5 points of defense against physical attack, which brings the attack of the opponent down to 0. But the attacker can receive support from friendly units. If there are friendly units that are adjacent to the target that is being attacked, the attacker receives +3 for each such unit. In this case, for example, the attacker would receive +3, 1, 2, and 3. Then there are passive battle abilities to take into account. Those are abilities that are printed on the cards, abilities that are indicated by a red square, and those apply automatically if, of course, the right condition triggers the ability. In this case, for example, if an enemy unit is wounded, increase the battle value by 3. The enemy is not wounded, so we do not apply this one, but you still have to check for all passive battle abilities. Then you get to a phase of the battle where the players finally can decide what's going to happen next. Players now alternate playing battle cards and or using battle abilities that must be activated, those that are indicated by a red dot. The attacker goes first doing this. Suppose that the attacker decides to use this ability, which allows him to inflict 3 wounds on himself, ouch, but in return, the battle value of the attacker is increased by 10. Pretty strong. The defender responds by playing this card. If using a magic attack, the unit gains 5 to its battle value. But you have to pay the mana cost for each card that you use that way. The attacker plays this card at this point. If using a physical attack, the unit gains +5. And you continue alternating like this until the players decide not to use cards and abilities anymore, or they simply until they cannot do anything anymore. After this phase of combat is resolved, the characters will inflict on the opponent the amount of damage of wounds that is indicated by the black number in the box in which the battle marker is. This character would inflict 4 wounds, and that character would inflict 9 wounds on the opponent. That can be modified by the next phase, which is the bluff phase. Each player takes his bluff card and another card, and that card can be placed in front of the bluff card to decrease the battle value of the opponent or to increase one's own opponent by the number printed there. I'm afraid I'm going to receive a lot of wounds. Then I place the cards like this, and then I will subtract that number from the battle value of the opponent. You do not have to play a card during this phase. If you decide not to, then you place the bluff card in front of the other card. So you prepare the 2 cards secretly, then both players reveal their selection simultaneously, and they apply the possible modifications. After this step that may modify the battle value, you finally apply the resulting damage to the 2 characters. If the defender is killed and the attacker survives, then the attacker can advance and move into the tile where the defender was. To answer my initial question, is this what Panzer Assault should have been? No, this is what Panzer Assault is, unfortunately. This is a game that should have it all. Components that I find very attractive. I like the art, I like the tiles, so many units, so many spells, so many abilities. It seems that you have an enormous range of options, ways in which you can combine different factors to create different situations. You have a solitaire option, the 2-player option. This is really a game that should be a great game, and yet then everything is marred by extremely awkward, extremely fiddly logistics. This is just a game that seems to have overcomplicated procedures. Not the most complicated procedures I've ever seen, but more complicated than they should be. They are not, let's say, worth what the game has to offer, and this is a big problem. You really have the sense as you play the game that you're going through a series of moves rather than participating into an epic fight on a fantasy world. The procedures manage to kill the theme, even though the components are really struggling very hard to create that thing. There's a struggle really between components and mechanics, and unfortunately I find that the mechanics prevail. The setup time is considerable. If you're playing a solitaire scenario, you're setting up the game by yourself, between setting up the board with all the tiles and selecting the decks and doing this and that. It easily may take over half an hour to set up the game, and then the game lasts around half an hour. So, that is not good. And this is really a pity, because the game has good things. I really like the bluff element in combat. I really like some of the abilities and the spells. If the game were just atrocious, uniformly atrocious, well, so be it, who cares? But this is a game that I find maddening precisely because it has some good things, and then those good things are completely killed, at least for me, by the logistics of the game, the fiddliness of the game overall. If I were to go to a game night and somebody has set up the game, and it's somebody that already knows how to play it, that do not have to teach the game to that person, then I think maybe I would play it. Maybe that wouldn't be a problem. I could spend 30 minutes, half an hour playing the game that way, because that would reduce all of the annoying things around the game. Otherwise, I just don't see a reason for me to play this game in the future.